The stars had always belonged to them. For thousands of years, the Orcs' dominion ruled the galaxy with unmatched power. Their ships were enormous, black and silver, gleaming under the light of distant suns. They traveled from system to system, their fleets casting long shadows over peaceful planets. Everywhere they went, civilizations bowed, cities fell, and whispers of fear spread across the stars. The Orcs were not just rulers. They were gods in the eyes of every sentient species that dared exist. On the bridge of the flagship Eternal, Sovereign Supreme Commander Zorath looked out at a nebula swirling in brilliant purples and blues. His eyes, sharp and cold, reflected the light of distant stars. "Soon," he said, voice deep and steady, "all life will kneel before us." Around him, officers nodded, their expressions a mixture of reverence and fear. They believed in him completely. After all, Zorath had never failed, not once, not in 1,000 years. The Orcs' dominion was a name that demanded respect, or fear. Entire planets were abandoned after their armies arrived, civilizations crushed before they could even beg for mercy. Their technology was far beyond any other species. Ships could cross light years in days, weapons could vaporize mountains, and artificial intelligences predicted strategies before their enemies even moved. The galaxy was theirs, and no one could challenge them. Yet somewhere in the outer spiral of the galaxy, a small blue planet stirred quietly. Humans lived there. To the Orcs, humans were insignificant, small, weak, and barely advanced enough to travel to orbit. Intelligence reports described them as curious but harmless. Zorath ignored them. Why waste attention on creatures who couldn't even defend themselves? Their cities were primitive, their weapons crude, and their armies laughably small. In the grand calculus of the galaxy, they were nothing. But humans had something the Orcs could not measure. They had a spark that even the most advanced sensors could not detect, a spark called determination. Humans survived disasters that should have wiped them out. They rebuilt civilizations after diseases, wars, and natural disasters. They stared at the impossible and refused to back down. It was not power that defined them. It was courage. And courage, as Zorath would soon learn, could challenge even gods. Captain Elena Voss stood on a launch pad on that tiny planet, looking at the night sky. She was human, young, and full of hope. Her world was fragile, but her heart was strong. She had never seen the Orcs nor imagined their existence. Yet she knew humanity had to survive. Every failure, every setback, had taught humans one lesson above all else. They never gave up. And tonight, as she prepared the colony's experimental starship for launch, Elena felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. The stars were calling them. Meanwhile, far above, the Orcs' fleets continued their endless march. Systems fell without resistance. Planets were stripped of resources, entire species erased from memory. The galaxy had grown silent under their rule, and yet, far below their radar, humans were preparing quietly. They were small, but they were already thinking, planning, learning. In their simplicity lay brilliance. In their weakness lay strength. The Orcs' dominion had ruled the stars for millennia. They had seen empires rise and fall, planets bloom and die, species evolve and vanish. They believed nothing could stop them. They believed the galaxy belonged to them. But the universe, as it always does, had a way of surprising even the most powerful. And on that small blue planet, humanity's story was just beginning. A story that would one day shake the galaxy to its core. In the shadow of the stars, the tiniest spark of rebellion quietly ignited. The Orcs did not see it yet, but soon that spark would grow into a fire that could consume even the greatest empire the galaxy had ever known. The Orcs' fleets arrived, like shadows over the horizon, darkening the skies of the small blue planet. Cities that had once thrived with laughter and life now trembled under the hum of approaching warships. The humans had never faced anything like this. Entire colonies were wiped out in hours, buildings reduced to ash, and cries of fear filled the air. The sky burned with the light of Orcs' weaponry. Humanity had faced storms, famine, and disease, but never this. Never the unstoppable force of a civilization that had ruled the galaxy for millennia. Captain Elena Voss stood in the ruins of her city, her face streaked with soot and tears. Around her, survivors huddled, their eyes wide with terror, but Elena refused to surrender. "We may be small," she shouted, her voice trembling yet determined, "but we are human, and we will fight. We will survive. We will not bow." Her words, simple and raw, spread quickly. They were the spark the humans desperately needed. Fear remained, but it was tempered by courage, a courage that had carried their species through countless disasters before. The humans' weapons were weak, barely scratching the Orvax armor. Crude starships fired at massive warships that could have obliterated entire continents. Every human loss was heartbreaking, every failed attack a reminder of the gulf between them and the Orvax. And yet, their spirit did not break. Every time they fell, they got up. Every time they lost a battle, they learned something new. Humans adapted faster than the Orvax expected. Supreme Commander Zorath observed the chaos from orbit. His eyes narrowed as he watched humans resist in ways his centuries of experience had never prepared him for. "Pathetic," he muttered. Yet deep inside, a seed of irritation grew. These creatures, weak and fragile as they were, refused to die quietly. They were not afraid. They fought back with creativity and courage that defied logic. And while Zorath believed he could crush them like insects, he could not ignore the stubbornness in their eyes. Elena led a small resistance group on daring missions through the ruins of cities and underground tunnels. They scavenged what little weapons remained and repaired broken ships with ingenuity born of necessity. Humans were inventors, thinkers, and survivors all at once. Their tactics were simple, unpredictable, and dangerous. Where the Orvax expected submission, they met resistance. Where the Orvax expected fear, they met defiance. The first clash happened over the skies of the capital city. Orvax warships descended like mountains, ready to crush all life. But humans launched their fleet, old ships patched together with scavenged parts, firing blindly yet courageously at impossibly strong enemies. The battle was chaotic and terrifying. Explosions lit the night, firestorms raged through the streets, and countless lives were lost. But amid the destruction, humans scored their first victory. A small Orvax warship exploded, its pieces falling into the city like meteors. Survivors cheered. The impossible had happened. Humans had struck fear into the Orvax for the first time. Elena looked at the wreckage and felt a mixture of grief and pride. Each life lost was a heavy burden, but each victory was proof that humans could survive. They were fragile, yes, but their courage made them dangerous. They refused to bow, refused to run, and refused to give in. Zorath, watching from his command deck, felt something he had never felt before. Unease. He had faced empires, tyrants, and rebellions. He had crushed planets under his hand. But humans were different. They were unpredictable, fearless, and relentless. He could not calculate their next move. They were a puzzle that no strategy could solve. And in that moment, the seeds of a war that would shake the galaxy were sown. Humans, small and fragile as they were, had stood against gods. And the galaxy would soon learn that courage, defiance, and the will to survive could challenge even the most powerful empire ever known. After the first clash, the humans had learned a painful truth. They could not fight the Orvax directly. Their weapons were too weak, their ships too fragile, their numbers too small. Every battle cost lives, and every day brought grief. Yet humanity had something the Orvax could never understand: ingenuity born of desperation. Humans did not give up. They adapted. They survived. Captain Elena Voss led her team into the frozen wastes beyond the ruins of their shattered cities. Beneath layers of ice and snow, they discovered something extraordinary: an ancient Orvax data vault, hidden and abandoned. Its walls were massive, its doors sealed with complex codes that took hours of effort to break. When they finally accessed it, Elena's eyes widened. Inside were secrets of the Orvax dominion, strategies, fleet movements, weaknesses, and technologies the humans had never seen. For the first time, humans held a weapon the Orvax could not predict: knowledge. They studied the vault carefully, learning how the Dominion operated, how their fleets communicated, and how their strategies could be anticipated. Every piece of information was a treasure. Every new understanding a small victory. Humans were learning to fight the greatest empire in the galaxy, not with sheer force, but with brains, courage, and cunning. Elena shared the information with resistance leaders across the planet. They devised a plan that was bold, almost reckless, but brilliantly simple. Humans would use Orvax technology against them. They would strike where the Orvax least expected, hitting weak points in fleets and fortresses that were thought impenetrable. They worked tirelessly, modifying stolen ships, repairing broken weapons, and training quickly. Every night was a struggle, every day a lesson in resilience. Meanwhile, the Orvax remained arrogant. Zorath believed the humans could never adapt. To him, their desperation was meaningless. But reports began to reach him, fleets disappearing without explanation, fortresses destroyed by unknown attackers, human vessels attacking Orvax ships with precision. Confusion spread among his officers. "How is this possible?" one whispered. "They are too weak, too small. They cannot do this." The humans' first major success came during a raid on an Orvax supply station. Using a combination of stolen Orvax ships and modified weapons, they bypassed defenses that were thought impenetrable. Explosions tore through the station, shattering communication arrays and supply lines. For the first time, the Orvax tasted fear. Not panic, but the slow, creeping awareness that these fragile beings were dangerous. Elena watched the news reports from captured Orvax data feeds. Humans across the planet cheered quietly in secret, knowing their victories came at great cost. Every loss of life was mourned, every victory celebrated. Humanity was proving itself capable of something extraordinary, standing against gods and surviving. Zorath grew restless. His centuries of rule had never been challenged in such a way. Every plan the Orvax devised seemed to fail. The humans were learning faster than expected, striking in ways that were unpredictable, clever, and bold. "Curious," he said, voice low and almost thoughtful. "Such weakness, yet such resilience. How do they continue?" Humans had a simple advantage that no technology could replace: willpower. They fought not for conquest, not for power, but for survival, for their families, and for hope. Their mistakes became lessons, their losses became strength, and their courage became legend. And in the dark corners of the galaxy, where fear once reigned, whispers began to spread. Maybe humans were not the fragile, insignificant creatures the Orvax had believed. Maybe they were something more. Elena stood on a hill overlooking a human settlement rebuilt from the ruins. Fires burned warmly, not from battle but from cooking and life. Children laughed in the distance, unaware of the war above them. For the first time, she allowed herself a small smile. Humanity was small, humanity was weak, but humanity was alive, and alive they were dangerous. The first spark of hope had grown into a flickering flame, a fire that with courage, ingenuity, and determination could one day burn brighter than the mightiest fleets of the galaxy. The galaxy was beginning to change. What had once been an unstoppable empire now faced uncertainty. The humans, tiny and fragile in the eyes of the Orvax, were no longer a curiosity. They were a threat. Planets that had bowed in fear began to rise, inspired by the courage of a species that refused to die quietly. Humanity was small yet brilliant, their ingenuity and bravery beginning to tilt the scales in ways the Orvax never imagined. Captain Elena Voss stood aboard the Starfire, one of the few remaining human warships capable of interstellar travel. Her crew was tired, battle-worn yet determined. Every mission had cost lives, yet every mission had taught them something new. They had learned to move faster than the Orvax expected, to strike without warning, and to survive against impossible odds. Human creativity and courage were becoming weapons as powerful as any fleet. In orbit above a major Orvax colony, humans launched their most daring operation yet. They struck at the heart of the Orvax supply network, a station that supplied fleets across the sector. Using stolen Orvax ships and weapon systems modified with human technology, the attack was swift, precise, and devastating. Explosions lit the void, and the Orvacs, so used to dominance, were caught off guard. Entire fleets were destroyed before they could mount a proper defense. On the ground, resistance movements grew stronger. Small groups of humans coordinated strikes across multiple worlds, sabotaging factories, intercepting supplies, and rescuing prisoners. Where the Orvacs expected obedience, they found cunning, courage, and relentless defiance. Every planet that joined the human cause became a new front in a war the Orvacs were not prepared for. Supreme Commander Zorath watched the chaos from his flagship. His face, once calm and unyielding, now showed lines of worry. "They are learning faster than we predicted," he said, voice low and tight. "They adapt to everything. Their minds. They are dangerous." For the first time in his life, Zorath doubted, not just the humans, but the future of the Dominion itself. The Orvacs had ruled for millennia, but every plan they devised was now challenged by creatures that were smaller, weaker, and paradoxically stronger than they had ever imagined. Elena's strategy was simple yet brilliant. Humans fought smarter, not harder. They avoided head-on confrontations where they would surely die, instead focusing on disruption, sabotage, and the Orvacs' blind spots. Every victory, no matter how small, inspired hope. Every success was proof that survival was possible, that they could challenge the greatest empire the galaxy had ever known. Yet, the human victories came at a cost. Cities lay in ruins, families were shattered, and heroes fell in every battle. Elena mourned each life lost, but she refused to let grief paralyze her. She reminded her crew that every sacrifice was part of something greater, the survival of their species, the restoration of freedom, and the hope that one day the galaxy could be free from tyranny. The humans' defiance spread like wildfire. Other oppressed species began to resist quietly, inspired by reports of human courage. Even the Orvac soldiers, who had once believed themselves invincible, began to hesitate. The stories of small, fragile humans striking down mighty fleets and outwitting commanders like Zorath shook their confidence. Fear, a feeling they had rarely known, crept into the ranks. Elena stood on the bridge of the Starfire, looking at the stars. Once they had seemed distant and impossible. Now they were a battlefield, a canvas for humanity's courage and ingenuity. She thought of the lives lost, the battles fought, and the empire beginning to falter before them. Her heart was heavy yet proud. Humanity was small, yet they had become a force the galaxy could not ignore. The tide was turning. The mighty Orvacs Dominion, rulers of the stars for millennia, had met a species that refused to bow. A species that fought not for power but for survival, for justice, and for hope. And as humans pushed forward, planet by planet, battle by battle, it became clear. The galaxy was no longer theirs to dominate without challenge. The Orvacs Dominion, once the unchallenged rulers of the stars, began to crumble. Fleets that had once seemed invincible were destroyed in unexpected attacks. Planets that had lived in fear for centuries rose in rebellion. And at the center of it all, humanity, small and fragile in appearance, pushed forward with relentless determination. Every battle they fought, every life they risked, was a step toward dismantling an empire built over millennia. Captain Elena Voss led her crew through a sector once considered impenetrable. Human ships, modified from scavenged Orvacs technology, struck quickly and vanished into hyperspace before the enemy could respond. Entire Orvac supply chains collapsed. Communication hubs went dark. And everywhere the humans appeared, fear spread among the Orvacs' ranks. The dominion that had ruled without question was now shaken to its core. The collapse was not sudden. It was painful, slow, and deliberate. Each human victory inspired more rebellion. Planets freed themselves from Orvac's rule, often without waiting for direct human intervention. Propaganda, sabotage, and resistance movements spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The Orvacs, who had relied on fear to maintain order, discovered that fear alone was no longer enough. Courage, cunning, and defiance could topple even the mightiest empire. Zorath watched as his empire began to unravel. His flagship, Eternal Sovereign, had once been a symbol of unstoppable power. Now it was a refuge for a commander who could not predict his enemy's next move. "How can this be?" he muttered, voice tight with disbelief. For the first time, he realized that legacy means nothing if no one remains to remember it. Every planet the humans liberated, every fleet they destroyed erased a piece of the Orvac's history. Centuries of conquest, invention, and terror were slipping away like sand through his fingers. On the surface of a liberated planet, Humans celebrated quietly. Fires burned in the night. Children laughed, and families rebuilt what the Orvax had tried to destroy. Elena looked at the people, tired but alive, and felt the weight of both sorrow and triumph. Every life lost was a wound on her heart, but every victory was proof that humans could achieve the impossible. Small, fragile, underestimated, they were unstoppable when united by hope, courage, and necessity. The Orvax tried to respond, but their arrogance became their weakness. Fleets were sent to crush human-held systems only to vanish in ambushes. Strategic bases fell in flames. Even their most loyal officers began to question their leadership. The humans had learned to fight in ways the Orvax could not anticipate, striking where they were weakest, exploiting mistakes that centuries of dominance had made them complacent. Elena led a critical strike against an Orvax fortress orbiting a vital energy hub. The fortress had been considered untouchable, its defenses perfect, but humans, using stolen technology and careful planning, breached the outer shields and disabled the weapon systems. Explosions ripped through the structure, and for the first time a symbol of Orvax dominance had been destroyed in plain sight. The people who had once trembled before the Dominion now had hope. Zorath's despair deepened. The humans were relentless. They did not fight for glory or conquest. They fought for survival, for justice, for their families, and for the memory of those lost. That motivation made them unpredictable, dangerous, and impossible to break. Every action the Orvax took was countered. Every fleet sent to punish them returned smaller, defeated, or not at all. By the end of the year, the Orvax Dominion had lost control over more than half its territory. The mighty empire that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years was now a shadow of itself. And humanity, though small in number and fragile in appearance, had become the unstoppable force that no one, not even the most powerful, could ignore. Elena stood on the bridge of her ship, watching the stars. Each one represented a world now free, a victory earned through courage and sacrifice. She knew the war was far from over, but for the first time she felt the hope of victory. Humanity had proven itself capable of destroying an empire, of rewriting history, and of showing the galaxy that strength was not measured in fleets or weapons, but in heart, spirit, and the will to never give up. The Orvax legacy, built over millennia, was collapsing, and in its place, humanity's story was rising, a story of survival, courage, and an unstoppable drive that would change the galaxy forever. The Orvax Dominion was on its knees, but Supreme Commander Zorath refused to surrender. His flagship, the Eternal Sovereign, hovered over the heart of the Dominion, surrounded by the wreckage of once proud fleets. Planets had fallen, fortresses had burned, and the galaxy's whispers were no longer of fear but of hope. Yet Zorath, proud and unyielding, prepared for one final stand. If he could not rule the stars, he would at least die fighting. Captain Elena Voss stared at the enemy flagship through the viewport of the Starfire. Her hands clenched the controls, her eyes unwavering. "This ends today," she whispered. She had lost friends, watched cities crumble, and carried the weight of survival on her shoulders. But she also carried something more powerful than any weapon: humanity's courage. Small and fragile, humans had defied the greatest empire in history, and now they were about to finish what they had started. The humans' attack was swift and precise. They struck from multiple directions, hitting weak points in the Eternal Sovereign's defenses. Explosions ripped through the massive hull, lighting the void with fire and debris. Orvax gunners fought desperately, but humans had learned their patterns, their weaknesses, and their arrogance. Each human strike was a combination of skill, courage, and clever improvisation. Zorath's voice rang through the command deck, cold and commanding. "Do not let them win. Fire everything." But even his orders were too slow. Human ships darted between Orvax fire, attacking control hubs, engines, and weapon arrays. Systems failed one by one. The mighty Dominion flagship, symbol of millennia of power, trembled under the relentless assault of beings it had once dismissed as insignificant. Elena led a daring boarding operation. Human teams suited in protective exosuits infiltrated the Eternal Sovereign. Inside, the corridors echoed with the clash of battle. Humans fought with precision, striking at critical systems while avoiding traps and ambushes. Zorath's officers fell one by one, overwhelmed not by brute force but by humans' unyielding resolve and clever tactics. In the heart of the flagship, Elena faced Zorath. The Supreme Commander towered over her, his eyes burning with fury and disbelief. "You are weak. You should have bowed," he roared, swinging a plasma staff with lethal force. But Elena was faster, lighter, and driven by something no Orvax could understand. Hope, survival, and the memory of everyone she had lost. She dodged, countered, and struck with calculated precision. The battle was fierce, brutal, and exhausting. The corridors of the Eternal Sovereign shook with every explosion outside. Elena felt the weight of humanity on her shoulders, the hope of billions resting on her small, unarmored frame. And then, with one final coordinated strike from her team and the ship outside, the flagship began to collapse. Fires raged through the hull, systems failed, and the great vessel shuddered. Zorath's eyes widened in disbelief. For the first time he felt fear. The invincible, eternal ruler of the stars was being destroyed, not by overwhelming force, but by beings he had deemed insignificant. The humans were small, fragile, and underestimated, but they were unstoppable. And in that moment, the Supreme Commander understood the truth he could not admit. Legacy means nothing if the future belongs to those who refuse to bow. As the Eternal Sovereign exploded, its remnants scattered across space, Elena and her team escaped in damaged but functional ships. They floated among the stars, battered but alive. Humanity had survived the impossible. The last symbol of Orvax tyranny was gone, and with it, the empire that had ruled the galaxy for millennia. Elena looked at the stars, her chest heaving with exhaustion and triumph. She thought of the people who had fallen, the planets freed, and the courage that had carried them through. Humanity had done what no one expected. They had faced gods and prevailed. Small, fragile, underestimated, yet victorious. The galaxy would never forget this day. The humans, though few in number, had struck down the mighty, proving that courage, ingenuity, and determination could overcome any force. And as Elena guided her crew through the debris, she knew that humanity's story was only beginning. The galaxy was silent. Where once fleets had clashed and planets had burned under the shadow of the Orvax dominion, there was now stillness. The Supreme Commander was gone. His empire, mighty for thousands of years, had collapsed, and humanity, small, fragile, underestimated humanity, stood victorious. Captain Elena Voss floated above a liberated world, watching the sun rise over cities rebuilt from the ashes. Fires now burned in hearths, not from destruction but from life. Children laughed, playing in the streets, unaware of the horrors their species had endured. Families embraced and communities began to heal. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. Every loss, every scar, every life sacrificed had led to this moment. Freedom. The victory was not just military, it was moral. Humanity had survived where countless others would have fallen. They had faced the gods of war and refused to bow. Planets that had once trembled in fear now looked to humans with hope. Entire civilizations were inspired by their courage, learning that no matter how powerful an enemy might be, spirit and will could overcome. Elena's mind wandered to the Orvax. For millennia, they had ruled the stars, leaving behind monuments, fleets, and legacies of fear. But all of it was gone now. Humanity had obliterated not out of hatred but necessity. The galaxy could no longer be ruled by tyranny. The Orvax legacy, powerful as it had been, was erased, not to dishonor but to make way for something new. She walked among her people, soldiers and civilians alike. The survivors had stories etched on their faces: loss, courage, hope, and resilience. They had fought not for glory but for survival. They had shown the galaxy that even the smallest, weakest beings could become unstoppable if united by purpose. And Elena knew that their journey was far from over. There were still worlds to rebuild, lives to restore, and the stars themselves to explore. Humanity's triumph sent ripples across the galaxy. Species that had lived in fear of the Orvax began to rise, no longer hiding under oppression. Trade resumed between planets, alliances formed, and communities rebuilt what had been lost. But humanity remained the symbol of hope, courage, and defiance. They were small, fragile, underestimated, but their spirit could never be crushed. Elena stood atop a hill, looking at the stars she had once thought unreachable. They were still distant, mysterious, and full of danger, but also full of possibility. Humanity had proven itself not through brute strength alone, but through heart, ingenuity, and the refusal to surrender. The galaxy had witnessed what it meant to be human, to fight when hope seemed impossible, to create when destruction loomed, and to rise when all odds were against you. In every liberated city, in every rebuilt planet, and in every whisper among the stars, humanity's story was remembered. They had taken on the gods of war and survived. They had erased a legacy of fear and replaced it with a legacy of courage. And in doing so, they had reminded the universe of a truth that no power, no empire, and no weapon could ever erase. Spirit, will, and heart could change everything. Elena breathed deeply, feeling the weight of history and the light of hope at the same time. Humanity had survived the impossible. They had fought giants and won. They had reclaimed the stars not to rule, but to protect, to explore, and to inspire. And as she looked toward the horizon, she knew the story of humanity was just beginning. A new dawn had risen across the galaxy, one not of tyranny, fear, or domination, but of courage, unity, and hope. The stars were no longer ruled, they were free. And so humanity, small and underestimated, had become unstoppable. The galaxy would never forget the day humans showed what it truly meant to be alive. They had destroyed an empire, erased a legacy of fear, and risen above all odds. And in every star, every world, and every heart, the message remained clear. Courage is stronger than power, and humanity, no matter how small, would never be defeated.